Good day. This is Anthony O'Sullivan, Partner and Director at White Shield Partners. And I'd like to welcome Ms. Barbara Rambousek, Director, Gender and Economic Inclusion at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, for the launch of the Global Labor Resilience Index 2021. Barbara, it's a pleasure to have you here today for the launch of the GLRI. And I'd like to ask you a first question, which refers to the excellent results that we have in labor market resilience for European countries. So in fact, 9 out of 10 countries in Europe are in the top 10 of the GLRI. But when you look at wider Europe, there are major inequalities between and within countries. What would be some of your observations on this?
Thank you very much, and thank you also for inviting me to participate in this interview today, which is a great pleasure. To respond to your question, we do indeed see that European countries are performing very well in relation to this GLRI, which is of course very positive, and we very much welcome that. But we also see the discrepancies within Europe, and then of course also if we look at other regions further afield, in particular North Africa, but of course also Central Asia. So there are big gaps here in resilience, and I think it will be very important for countries to learn from each other and to be able to tackle and close those gaps. At EBRD, we support our countries of operation to become sustainable market economies. And in a nutshell, what we mean by that is that it is economies that are more green, more digital, but also very importantly, more equal. So in this context, we focus specifically on inequalities of opportunities, which is basically the unfair part of inequality. It's the part of inequality that is not due to your personal effort, but it's due to characteristics that you cannot control, where you're born, who your parents were, which gender you have, etc. So we do this by working with our clients across all the sectors in order to open up access to employment and skills and entrepreneurship and finance, but also different types of services, transport infrastructure. In the context of resilient labor markets, I think this concept of equality of opportunity is particularly important. It's a key aspect to ensure that there is an efficient allocation of human resources within markets in order to enable market societies to tackle the shocks and the challenges that come, shocks such as the current pandemic, but also longer term challenges such as climate change, digitalization, etc. To tackle those challenges, but also to harness the opportunities that particularly these mega trends bring as well. In this context, and I think that's something that your report also highlights very clearly, the focus cannot just be on jobs per se. We know that the majority of those Europeans, but also beyond, who live in poverty also have a job. So it's not just about access to employment, it's also about the quality of that job and what it actually means in terms of the livelihoods of people and how it changes and lifts up people. So for labor markets to be resilient, it has to be about tackling the quality of jobs, and in this context also supporting skills developments, enabling people to access the new types of jobs that are coming. Reskilling, upskilling, lifelong learning, I think are key elements of a resilient labor market policy in this context. What that does require, and that's something that we see across our countries of operation, but also if we look at those countries that are performing best in your index, is a close policy cooperation between different partners. So if we look at the green transition challenge that we see, where countries are particularly regions are transitioning from fossil fuel dependent labor markets to clean technology labor markets, this is not just an issue of the ministries for energy, the ministries for economics. This has to be done in close cooperation also with ministries for labor, ministries for education. So it's that interplay between those policies at a regional level, at a national level, that I think is very important and something that we see very clearly also from our work. And then of course the additional aspect, if you want, is the integration of the voice of the private sector into shaping those policies, particularly if we look at skills, national skills standards, curricula, but also a focus on transferable skills.
Thank you, Barbara. That's a very comprehensive answer. And you're director at the EBRD for gender and economic inclusiveness. And those two themes are actually core themes in the whole framework for resilient labor markets. As you rightly pointed out, we consider not only the quantity of jobs, but fundamentally a focus on the quality of jobs and their sustainability over time. What would be maybe some observations on your part in the current situation we face for women and let's say for youth on the inclusiveness side, especially in the context of COVID-19, and what could be some actions that government take to respond to those challenges?
So if we start with the focus on gender, I think there is now plenty of data and increasingly also research available to show that women are disproportionately impacted by this crisis in a range of different areas. If we look at the economic impact, even before the crisis, women tended to have jobs that were less well paid, less secure. Women tended to have smaller savings. This has only been exacerbated by the current crisis. Indeed, 75% of women work in vulnerable sectors such as tourism, for example, but also services sectors. A second element is, of course, the huge burden of additional unpaid care work. And the big question is, who shoulders that burden? What we're seeing is that continues to be women. There's actually interesting new research that just came out showing that despite what women earn, so even if women are the primary earner in a household, they still continue to shoulder the majority of the unpaid care work, even in that context. So that really shows that there are entrenched cultural norms and traditional norms that particularly come to the fore in the times of crisis. And that's something that we will need to tackle if we want to make labor markets more resilient in the long run. And then, of course, the third element here is the shadow pandemic of gender-based violence and harassment, which we know has increased during the crisis and is a major issue that will affect or already does affect our societies overall. And in that context, also the resilience, of course, that we have. If we look at young people, they have seen their education interrupted. This transition that is always very difficult, actually, at the best of times, from education, from school or universities into jobs, into employment, is even more precarious, even more difficult now. And if we look at regions and populations in underdeveloped regions, many of those have been further impacted. For example, if you live in a region that primarily lived off tourism, then this clearly has been taken away as a source of income for the entire region, and people need to refocus. All that in a context where migration and the opportunity to go and find economic opportunities elsewhere is much more difficult. So the crisis has impacted on different people in different ways. At EBRD, we actually work with our clients across a range of different areas in order to help address and tackle those now increasing inequality gaps. So, for example, if we look at gender equality, but actually also enabling young people to make that transition from school to jobs. We work with our clients to improve their HR policies and practices, to partner with schools and vocational schools, and to increase and to make that transition easier. We also continue to support a lot of business support and access to finance and entrepreneurship training, very often with a specific focus on green technologies and green skills for female entrepreneurs. And then, of course, as part of our investments in infrastructure, we ensure inclusive and gender-sensitive transport solutions, but also access to ICT connectivity. And then in relation to gender and the sort of the care burden, particularly also investments into the care economy to make childcare, elderly care more affordable and more easily accessible. So I think all these measures are very important. If we look at a policy angle in this context and labor market reforms, we are actually bringing that private sector voice into engagements with authorities, for example, in Central Asia, to tackle labor market restrictions that women still face who are not able to perform all types of employment in Kazakhstan. And we have made huge progress there with the authorities to drop some of these restrictions and are working towards eradicating them altogether. But also climate investment reforms, where we apply a gender lens into supporting particularly women entrepreneurs to grow and set up their businesses. And then, of course, integrating gender and inclusive measures into a wider range of infrastructure policies at a national level, but also, for example, our Green Cities programs, where we work with municipalities, with city to ensure more sustainable urban solutions, but that also have a clear inclusive and gender sensitive component.
Thank you, Barbara. So very clear on directions for improving gender and inclusiveness. Now, if we look more broadly at how to improve labor market resilience, and concretely, as we go towards the tail end, we hope, of the COVID-19 crisis, what would be, in your view, the top areas for action for governments to improve labor market resilience, let's say in the next 12 months, or maybe even longer term going forward, to ensure transformation of the labor markets?
So again, at EBRD, we work very closely with our clients, primarily in the private sector, but also in the public sector, to bring their voice into shaping those policy solutions. But as you have asked me about the three top recommendations, I would make the following. First, I think the focus has to be on agile labor market policies, and the focus here has to be on protecting people and livelihoods, not necessarily jobs. So this is really about ensuring that small entrepreneurs continue to exist, that employees stay in their jobs, and that also there is a solution found for people who work in the informal sectors or in precarious platform type employments. So it really has to be about ensuring livelihoods here for a continued ability of the labor market to absorb and deal with the current shock, but then actually for human capital to be maintained as much as possible for when the recovery actually starts and when we all go back and hopefully the economy starts growing again, and in a way to facilitate that growth. The second area then is that we see that this crisis has accelerated existing trends that were already there before, particularly if we look at digitalization and future of work and skills, green skills and technologies. So here I think there is a lot of opportunity that this crisis in that sense opens to speed up a focus on skills policies, integrating skills policies with labor market policies. But then, as I mentioned earlier in the example of the green economy transitions, looking at much broader policy frameworks to facilitate an ability of labor markets to harness the opportunities, to enable companies to move into new sectors, to innovate and to grow, and to have people who bring the right skills, who are agile, who can transfer within sectors from one sector to the other, who can upskill and reskill and be mobile and effective in this context. And then the third one is to specifically focus on regions and to support the challenges that they undergo. That can be in relation to green economy transition, but there are also other factors. Global value chains are being disrupted. And as I mentioned earlier, the crisis has had a disproportionate impact on tourism and other sectors that tended to be predominant in particular regions. So it is about bringing together integrated regional development plans that focus on a range of different policy responses and bring the private sector into addressing those challenges in a holistic way.
Thank you, Barbara, for addressing these questions and providing your insights for the launch of the Global Labour Resilience Index 2021. And we look forward to working together with the EBRD to implement some of these policy actions.
Thank you very much.